You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unknown, the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson. Hi, everybody.
And today's show, I hope you all have freshly cleaned and painted your walls of your house, because we're doing a show called The House with the Bleeding Walls. Some of you have probably only have a reference to, if you ever read the Amityville Horror, or maybe even saw the movie, one of the things that happened in the story is they said the walls were bleeding red when they ran down the staircase. The wall was bleeding. So this is another actual case that happened much later. This was in September 8th, 1987. Just before midnight, Minnie Winston stepped out of her bath and into the strangest night of her life. The 77-year-old noticed a strange red spill on the bathroom floor. As she was about to inspect the unusual puddle, she noticed that the walls in her bathroom also had the same reddish stain mysteriously oozing from its surface. She stepped outside and saw that the halfway floor also had pools of reddish blotted lines across the tiles. "Will," she called out, "come look at all this red stuff coming out of the floors." For a split second, Minnie panicked when her husband didn't reply. At 79 years of age, Minnie's husband's health was fragile and needed professional medical care. William Winston had to be hooked up to a dialysis machine every day to have his blood cleansed, and the process would leave him exhausted each day. Now, Minnie's fear turned into wild confusion when her husband appeared at the other end of the hallway. He was in clean clothes and with no visible signs of blood anywhere on his body. He stood looking at the red blobs between them both. The expression on his wife's face mimicked his own. Whose blood was it?
The Winstons were confused, and understandably, they were terrified. Not knowing what to do, they placed a call to the police station asking them to come and check out their home and the mysterious appearance of blood. Detective Steve Cartwright investigated the 6-bedroom brick house on the south side of Atlanta. The police searched the premises, but they were unable to find any signs of a break-in or someone hiding in the property. Given the amount of blood at the property, there were two things that Detective Cartwright was sure about that night: that what they were looking at was in fact blood, and that it didn't come from the Winstons. In over 22 years of residence in 1114 Fountain Drive, both Minnie and William had never experienced anything like this, like they had on that Tuesday night in 1987. Pools of blood were found in their kitchen as well as in their living room. It was on the floor of their bedroom, on the walls, and under the appliances. Given the amount of blood they found, it appeared to have been placed or dripped on the spot from a very lively source. In other words, someone inside their home had been bleeding profusely. However, there was nobody inside the house besides the couple, who neither had blood or cuts visibly on their bodies. Even when questioned about her husband's recent blood work, Minnie assured the officers that all aspects of the treatment were done at a medical facility, not inside their home. So, dumbfounded, the police collected samples of the blood and submitted it to a lab for further analysis. It was now a waiting game for Minnie and her husband as they went to bed every night wondering whose blood had been smeared on the floors and walls of their home. A few days after their initial discovery, Detective Cartwright visited the residence to deliver news that neither he nor the Winstons would come to understand. The lab results concluded that it was human blood that was collected inside the Winstons' home. Furthermore, it was from someone with type O blood. When the detective asked, Minnie stated that it wasn't hers, as hers was not that same type. She went on to tell him that her husband's blood type was A, which was confirmed by the medical facility that treated Mr. Winston. They went ahead and they confirmed the blood type. They were back where they started. The blood type didn't match the residents of the house, given the amount of blood that oozed through the walls and the floors. Detective Cartwright could only surmise that the blood did not come from the Winstons. So the question still remained, whose blood was it?
Now, when the story broke through small headlines in 1987, Minnie and William received a lot of unwanted attention from the press and the independent investigators. There were unwanted phone calls and knocks to the house at all hours of the day. The elderly couple kept to their word and stated over and over again that the blood did not belong to them and it was in no way a hoax. Now, I still don't know where the blood came from, Minnie said in an interview a few days after the lab results were revealed. And I'm tired of all these people asking me all these questions. If anybody comes here today, I'm not going to open my door. Now, the Atlanta police never figured out where the blood came from and who it came out of. Minnie and William Winston never experienced any further spontaneous blood incidents in the house that came to be known as the Bleeding House. So that's the basic story. What do you think?
Well, now it only happened the one night. It didn't continuously happen like over and over again.
Nope, just once.
Just
the once. Yep.
I kind of wonder, rather, not necessarily physically, but rather on a spiritual or a mental level, if they had been anywhere where there was trauma or they've experienced some kind of spiritual trauma and it contributed to the blood, it contributed to the blood being as sort of energy left over from that trauma.
Okay, I'm really confused by what you just said. You're going to have to break that down.
Okay. Take, for example, if you've experienced trauma on a physical level and well, people are going to think I'm crazy.
You're saying like mental trauma?
Mental
like
trauma.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress
something
disorder
like that.
Something?
Okay, yeah, you experience that. Sometimes on a spiritual level, it can come out in different ways. And if it's very extreme, people have noted that seeing cuts on people, or they've noted seeing injuries, but the person was perfectly okay, something that healed right away, but it was a spiritual trauma, so it manifested in different ways around their atmosphere or on them.
So you're saying it could have been one of the two of them that had a mental trauma, that this is a manifestation of
a manifestation
trauma.
Of that trauma,
Paranormal, supernatural manifestation, I guess,
right, and a lot of people don't believe in that. So if people are going to say, "Oh, Verna, you're full of it,"
Verna, you're full of it. No.
Well, if you don't believe or you never seen it, you probably would think I was full of it. But if you are somebody who's experienced that type of thing or seen it, and you've been to houses where people have had that type of trauma, and for some reason it materialized in the atmosphere around you, it's just an idea. This could have been an extension of that.
The only problem I would have with that theory is if it's one of the two of them. Now, he was going through dialysis, which is extremely painful.
Yeah.
Now, whether that physical pain works its way into his subconscious when he's sleeping, to have mental pain, spiritual pain, who's to say? Let's say it was him.
Right.
If he was going through dialysis and that happened, he was going through dialysis for a while. They never mentioned anything about this happening again or since. If you have an ability, I would think it's almost an ability. If you're being able to manifest blood from a mental, I don't know what you want to call it, wound, whatever. That's an ability. That's a mediumship ability.
Exactly. I think so too. Yeah.
But if it never happened before and it never happened since, I don't know if it was just so strong that it poked through and it did happen. I'm just throwing out hypothetical here.
No, your hypothetical theories are they sound like that could be plausible.
Her, she wasn't going through any of this. She never had that experiences and never had before and after. And neither one of them, it wasn't either one of their blood types. Now that's interesting. This is what I'm wondering here. So if you go with the manifestations of their mental trauma, and it was one of those two.
Okay, it doesn't match because it wasn't their blood types.
But neither does a manifestation either. You can't really explain a manifestation, so maybe who's to say it's the same blood type?
Okay, here's another theory.
Okay.
If they lived in an old house where there was, they never experienced spirit activity before, but something came up to bring it about. Sometimes spirit apparitions or spirit mental energy could be so strong that it could manifest sides or parts of you that used to be lifeblood when you were alive. Because you've heard about spirit apparitions leaving leftover evidence before.
What, like ectoplasm or what?
Well, I've heard of spirit apparitions leaving leftover evidence, like a piece of hair or a piece of clothing. I
never heard that before.
I actually have. Yeah,
Okay.
A piece of clothing that.
But that's different than a bleeding wall, though.
It is totally different than a bleeding wall. But I'm just saying, as an example, or a piece of hair, or a fingernail, or something that looked like it used to belong to the person who was alive, and their spirit and their intention was so strong they left something of themselves
like residual
behind.
or residue.
Residual, yeah. I'm wondering if this could be another manifestation of residual energy coming from a spirit that had a strong will and wanting to bring that will about in that house at that particular time.
See, my first question, if I heard this story at the time, would be, all right, let's do history of the house,
right,
who lived there before. Let's do history of the land and what happened on that land before that happened.
That would be a very good way to go about that.
What kind of rocks are in the area? Is there any kind of energy? Is there granite? Is there sandstone? Is there any underground brooks or rivers? What kind of energy that could come from that?
That would be a very good way to work with that.
Was it Native American land? I mean, this is Atlanta, Georgia, so it could have been, who knows what happened.
Civil War, maybe?
Civil War, it could have been.
A battleground?
We don't know.
Yeah.
But that would be my first question, is I would want to investigate the house and the land and the surrounding community to see what was actually there back in the day.
That's true, but these people were older. They weren't in the best of health. They probably didn't even have the energy to do that.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, they don't. What else can they say? It happened. They cleaned it up and never came back. So it's a one-time bleeding offer, I guess, so to speak. I don't know if you came home to your house and you found puddles or blood coming down your walls, little puddles of blood occasionally, and there was absolutely zero explanation for it. That would be really, really weird.
It would be. Well, considering my old apartment, I wouldn't be surprised. But I would do what you just suggested. I would go ahead,
do some history,
and do some more research on where I live, and also, considering the nature of the people I know and the nature of this radio show, people I've been in touch with, I would call these people in and say, what do you think of this? And try to get a picture and a sample to show them. And before I would even call police or detective, I mean, they did the best they could. They're not going to call somebody who's a ghost investigator. They didn't know people like that.
Well, it made sense that you would send a sample of the blood to the lab to see, is it human blood, which they found.
That would make sense.
They found the blood type and it didn't match either one.
It would have been the
two.
right thing to do to clear them of any suspicion, too.
Someone could throw out a theory that what if somebody broke in when they were gone
That would have been...
were already bleeding and wounded, and they just were walking around, and they were, bled a little here,
That would take
bled a
police
little
and
there.
detective work to rule them out.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And back then they didn't have DNA samples either. So now you can actually take that blood to a DNA...
87, they had some, but they didn't have, they don't have near what they do now, obviously.
I think that actually would have been the next step if they were going to go for the physical, is to get a DNA sample.
Wouldn't that be weird to get a DNA sample and come back with a name of somebody?
That would be weird. That would have been the thing. I mean, to me, that would have been the next step, because
especially if they woke up and they found it.
Yeah.
Their doors were locked and they woke up and they found the blood and they did a DNA sample and it came back and identified somebody. That would be so bizarre. And find out the person was dead, or what I mean?
That would be,
or locked up somewhere else for months.
Yeah. That would be. And I've also, this has nothing to do with physical blood samples, but I've also heard of old houses where there's rust and there's leftover residue from walls and tile, and it's red and rusty, and sometimes people mistaken it for dried blood, but
Right.
this is actual. I mean, this is probably more extreme than that. But it made me wonder if their house went through some extreme weather changes.
But if they sent it to a lab and it was identified as human blood.
It was identified as human blood, so that rules that out.
That totally rules out.
Yeah.
I have some more examples
Okay.
of bleeding houses.
Okay.
This one's case is called the Tallman House. It was about residents of an ordinary home in Horicon, Wisconsin. They were the victims of a really odd, haunted bunk bed, actually. It was
bunk bed.
It was 1988. The family suffered through about 9 months of really off-the-charts paranormal activity. And afterwards, they purchased a used bunk bed, including spectral apparitions. They ultimately fled their home, but not before rumors even of stranger things, including bleeding walls, spread throughout the neighborhood. So when they bought this haunted bunk bed, stuff really started to get crazy.
See, that happened for maybe, how long did they say it happened? It went
9 months.
9 months. This only happened for one night.
Yeah. So if your walls are continually bleeding for 9 months, my God.
Yeah, that would definitely be enough to want to look into everything, every possible source.
Exactly. Another one is the Mary Knoll Seminary. It's been torn down, of course, but the legends are that the seminary in Illinois was haunted by the spirits of a monk, and that he hung himself in the bell tower, and after he had died, there was all kind of strange noises, and there were reports of blood oozing down the tower's exterior. So that's interesting.
That is interesting.
So he actually
that is
died.
trauma.
He hung himself in the tower, and then the blood was oozing from the tower's exterior.
It makes me think that the theory that a spirit was so traumatized that some of that trauma is coming through still, like residual energy. That's basically what it is, but we don't know and how it starts.
That one could also slide into your theory about residue left over from rust, and if it's a tower, it's probably old seminary.
Right.
So who's to say that wasn't something else and it wasn't blood, but people thought, oh my God, it's bleeding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That I could see where that would happen. Mm-hmm. Another example is the house on Brownsville Road. A Pittsburgh family were terrorized by apparently a demonic entity known as the Demon of Brownsville Road. We haven't done a show on that yet.
Oh, wow.
They reportedly had bleeding walls, among other things that happened. So again, bleeding walls. And like I said, I mentioned in the Amityville Horror, they had the same kind of appearance of bleeding walls. Another example is the San Pedro haunting. A family that lived in San Pedro, California, believed they had a extremely violent poltergeist in their house. And there were multiple attacks physically, and someone who was there was even an attempt to hang someone. They're just two extremes of it. They suffered back in the late 80s. The mysterious red ooze that seemed to drip down their cupboards and other places was later reportedly to be confirmed human blood plasma. Again, it's confirmed.
It's confirmed, yeah.
So again, this is weird to
it
me.
really is. And it's like another as I mentioned, it could be another manifestation of spirit trauma, but this is manifesting as blood.
I'm going to go
Because
on
blood is life. It's the life force,
Yes,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go on another weird hypothesis theory.
Okay.
We are composed and made of flesh, bone, and water.
Yes.
Who's to say? Remember, they always say we're part of the universe. The universe
Yes.
is what we're made of.
Right.
What if this blood is somewhere that, when it collects together, that makes us? It also exists somewhere else. So occasionally, it seeps through into our plane of existence.
That would make sense too.
Like ingredients that seems occasionally drip through in some weird places, but we're all made of it. Every animal's made of it. And every living animal has blood.
But it makes you wonder what makes it seep into some places rather than others, and during certain times. Mm-hmm. But
I mean, I know that's a crazy ass theory, but
it's a crazy ass theory. But nevertheless, it's a theory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's another report in the Daily News in Oklahoma in 2015. A man discovered that his kitchen wall had been bleeding. When police arrived to investigate, they discovered the terrible truth. This is a reality truth. His upstairs neighbor had died of natural causes, hit their head, and their blood had oozed down the walls.
So again, there's a theory of leftover spirit trauma. Yeah.
Well, that's physical reality. In other words, he putrefied and he literally bled down through the walls, through the apartment.
Yeah, but the fact that it was still doing it, though.
No, that's what they found.
That's what they found. Oh, right. Oh, that was the actual. Oh, okay.
Proven. There's a reason why the walls were bleeding, because the man upstairs had died.
Oh, so it happened right there. It
Yes.
wasn't like from a long time
No.
ago. Okay, I get it now.
No,
Right.
which is, that's an example of that's what could happen. Mm-hmm. That could be a physical reality of what could happen. The other ones were more, it happened once, it happened a number of times. They were confirmed to be human blood, but there's no explanation for any of it.
I think I'm not trying to put down the technology they had back then, because people did the best they could. But I think today you could probably take these samples and get much more of a detailed analysis than you could have maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally have never known anybody who's had a bleeding wall phenomenon.
I've never heard of it, but I've heard of people who's been in old houses, like I mentioned, and the houses reeked of certain rust or liquids.
You can get molds too that get dark and mix with rust.
Yeah.
That would start to look like blood.
That's as closest as I've came to that, but not a bleeding house.
And maybe if it rains or a certain time of the year, it's more prone to drip,
right?
And putrefy and start
especially
turning to liquid.
Especially if you don't work on it or you don't do anything about it. Yeah.
If you have a nasty attic.
Yeah, and it's happened before, and it smells funky and musty, and.
But that could be where the dripping comes from. That could be where the mold. It could be where mildew, rust, all mixed together, creating that dark look to it.
That dark, rusty, yucky. Or I've seen more than dark, rusty. I've seen like an actual dark. I've seen mold, and it's gross.
Yeah, mold is very gross.
Yeah, it's gross.
But so would a bleeding wall with human blood.
A bleeding wall would be gross. That would actually freak me out.
Now, if anybody's out there, if you ever have a bleeding wall experience, go get a clean vial of some sort, a bottle, a jar.
It's very sterilized.
Very sterilized, very clean, and fill as much of that into the jar as you can and keep it in your fridge and have it analyzed to see if it's human.
And if you know where we are, we'd like to hear your results.
Yes, and you might want to, and if it keeps happening, you might want to move out, because that would be kind of gross to come home and go, oh, look, come on, everybody, welcome to my house. Oh, I'm sorry, my walls are bleeding again. I hate when my walls bleed. It's so messy. Careful where you walk.
Yeah, that would be, or you can get, or if there is an actual spirit in your house that's traumatized, maybe these days you can call somebody to come in and clear the house and send the spirit on his or her way.
It's funny, there's a Simpsons episode called Treehouse of Horror. They do it every Halloween.
Oh, how funny.
And there was an episode where Bart was staring at the wall going, bleed, and the wall would bleed. He'd go, bleed, and the wall would bleed.
I believe that. That's funny.
It just reminds me of that particular Simpsons.
Oh, that's funny. I've never seen that.
That's my only theories for the bleeding wall phenomena. So I mean, I have never. It's funny how you don't hear about a lot of poltergeist or ghost stories that have that in it. Mm-hmm. You either have a story that's all bleeding walls and nothing else, but some of these people, I guess, that they had poltergeist activity, paranormal activity before it happened. So maybe there's a connection. Maybe there's, maybe it is spiritually related, because it does seem to happen when some of the others have activity.
The more we talk about it, the more I think it's spiritually related, and that it's leftover trauma or residue from somebody who was once alive, and they left a part of themselves behind, or they're traumatized.
But if it's controlled by spirits, that's a weird and wicked talent to have, to make your walls bleed.
Well, maybe they're not controlling it on purpose. Maybe it's just happening because they're mentally traumatized still, and it's a result of it.
Comes
maybe
with the territory.
Maybe they're not doing it on purpose.
Just part of the. It's part of the effect of the activity.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a crazy story, and I hope it never happens to me. I never want bleeding walls in my house.
Yeah, and I live in an old apartment, and I don't want it either.
If anyone bleeds in your apartment, it's the guy upstairs. He probably died. Just saying.
Oh, that would be very sad. But
anyway.
Yeah, okay.
That's another episode of Ecto Portal, folks. And until next week, we'll say goodbye.
Bye. See you next week.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.